your reaction to, certain concepts. So that when staff does go to council, what staff is bringing to council is something that, kind of acknowledges kind of what a good cross-section of the community has kind of said is something that we think how we should go forward. So one of the questions in terms of the PBID renewal I would have as a question, is what is the thought of those here about if with some further research, there is comfort in believing that residents could be included into the PBID, what's the reaction of this group to that?
I'll mention that right away. And as I've said, and I consistently said, the Emery go-round was built mainly on mitigations for traffic, noise, pollution, etc., and parking from the businesses. And it's pretty obvious that, when businesses are open, that the streets of Emeryville are almost impassable. So most of this traffic is business oriented. It was developed for the mitigations and as a reward to the residents at that time when it was developed. That's the first thing. So for us to have to pay for our own mitigations to me is ridiculous. Additionally, many of people who are outside of Emeryville, who are traveling into Emeryville and using the Emery go-round, we will be subsidizing people who don't live in the city to use the Emery go-round. The residents that live in the city will be subsidizing out of city residents to use the Emery go-round. I don't think that's acceptable.
Well, as a business owner and not a resident, I take a little bit of exception with that. First of all, the population has doubled since this was initially, more than doubled. And when people, to address your last point, when people from outside the city come here, they spend money in Emeryville, not always, but for the most part. It's a possibility that they're coming and they're spending money. They're not just coming to ride the merry-go-round to MacArthur Bar.
But they're spending money at the businesses.
Right, but the businesses already fund 85% of the general fund, okay? So I think that with the PBID, it's still property-based. So if you're not in the special assessment zone, you wouldn't be levied any taxes. It's not a sales tax, it's not regressive, it's part, and there's no reason that a resident should be paying the same per square foot as a business, because the business square foot use is certainly higher than a residential square foot use. But I think across the board saying the residents get this for free is not appropriate.
Well, and let me just qualify that. I'm talking about the exempted residents, the Watergate and PPP is exempted and Emery Bay is exempted because they are homeowners associations. And in Watergate, you have maybe a 3 to 5% utilization of the Emery to expect, which is probably about the number, the percentage that they use the schools, maybe a little less. So to expect that 95 to 98% of the people to pay for not using this is regressive, particularly to the people who are on fixed incomes and everything else, who are paying assessments that they're not getting any value out of anymore. So from that perspective, I stand by what I said. For the residents who are now in the Hollis area and in some of these other areas where they are in a high use area, that's already happening. The city is already having assessments for existing rentals and et cetera. So, but for the existing Watergate, PPP, and I would disagree.
Well, we already know legally you can't do a categorical exemption. That's not allowed anymore, so.
Yes.
So my feeling on that, to answer your question, is I certainly don't represent PPP, but I live there, and it's a service that I'm being provided, I'd be happy to pay for it. But at the same time, I want quality for what I'm going to be paying in. And if I'm going to pay in, then my expectation is that if I'm trying to get from PPP to MacArthur BART, I'm not going to go out to Watergate, and extend my trip a little bit further. And I also wanted to kind of address something that you said. 3% of Watergate may be riding the bus, but it sounds like, wow, they certainly have a lot of political clout as to impacting the operation of the bus system here. And for me, it has degraded my service for the route changes that they have to do. And I think that has to be thrown into the mix of things too.
That's a Ray Bowen issue, that they made a unilateral decision about something. Number one. Number two, you gotta remember, those stops are serving the Watergate Market and Trader Vic's. They are TMA paying members, so that's who they're serving.
Well,
Jeff?
one of the challenges is equity, because there's this whole task force, there was a whole group of people that, maybe it was small, they were very vocal and said, we don't think there's adequate equity, right? That's how this started in my mind. So you want to have equity, and so some residents are paying and some aren't. Maybe there's a way, Joe, to deal with that. I don't know the answer, but when you start saying this person is treated differently than this person, you get the opportunity for people to be anxious about it. And as it goes forward, and let's say there's a 10-year PBID, 30 years from now, probably Watergate's filled with all new people. And so I get what you're saying, like, we were here and we let something happen and we deserve a payback for it. But does that go for someone who moves in today at Watergate? If we could answer those things in a way that everyone felt comfortable, I'd feel better about it going into the future, because I'm trying to think, who's going to complain in 5 or 7 or 9 years, right? Because I envision this wanting to run 10 years from now, right? I don't, so I don't know the answer to it, but having exclusive classes it sounds like you want to not have that feeling so that most people are on board, but that doesn't, I'm not saying that means everyone should pay, but having an answer to that would be helpful.
Well, and then if that's the case, then the schools have to be included in that very thing.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, but they're not paying.
Here's two things. If you include the schools, you're just taxing yourself. It's a totally tax-funded operation. It's just you're taking your own money back to pay for something else. You're moving it around. They are not generating funds out of the school. And when we move into the ECCL, the city is going to have to cover that. Because what are you going to say? Let's not have a computer science teacher because we need to pay for the PBID. That's not going to work. And so when we finally get in the same facility, we will be covering it because it will be a public building, and that, but to imagine that we can go back and that there's some resource that we haven't tapped, it's just your money.
Well,
right. And then also, the other thing I'll say is that once you start thinking about opening it up and to more residents, I live over in the Triangle, and so then there's going to be questions about where is my bus? How far do I have to walk to the bus?
But theoretically, the Triangle wouldn't be in the assessment district and you wouldn't pay.
Conceivably, right, unless we expand it and we're talking about all residents, right? And so we could be opening something up. We're thinking about spreading equity. We could be spreading the definition of who gets a say, right, and who wants this service. So I think we just have to be mindful of that as we move forward. I'm interested in hearing more about the zones and what that would look like in terms of like kind of tiered pricing for the different zones. I think that's a good idea. I'm a little bit wary about kind of the contracting because it introduces that same problem, right, of people having higher expectations and really being pulled in a bunch of different directions when what you're trying to get to is a kind of fairness. And so I'm not sure how that would work.
Well, I'll just say that I agree in concept with most of what, with really everything that Joe says, but on the other hand, I also, I'm sure I voted for the AC transit tax, even though we don't have AC transit out at Emeryville, because I basically think we need, you know, a transit system in Alameda County, and I don't object personally to paying for that tax, even though we don't have AC transit, and I personally would be fine with paying for it. I take the Emery grant. I've always said that I would be more than happy to, you know, if there was a convenient way for them to collect fares, I'd be more than happy to pay a fare whenever I took it. My only concern is I actually don't really know what the percentage is. Joe thinks 3 to 5%. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what the percentage is of people who are taking it. I'm pretty sure that 2,500 people aren't taking it every day, because then I think we need considerably more buses. My only concern is, will the people who are not taking it view it in the same way that I do, that we need to have a transit system and be willing to pay it? Maybe they wouldn't, maybe they wouldn't, I'm not sure. I do know a number of people who showed up at the meetings, at the city council meeting, said that they had never taken it. Some of them said they'd never taken it, or they almost never take it. But they think that we do need a transit system there, so I would be willing to give it a try.
Karen?
So, the residents have the power of the vote, and they elect the city council. Maybe,
Yeah.
look, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, there isn't any sort of hidden agenda here, but we've talked about some places, some sources of revenues that kind of the city controls. I mean, the hotel tax, maybe you can get AC. The county to give you more money, maybe you can get AC transit. Those are things that your elected officials and their staff can really work hard on. And maybe there's a way to say, as long as other people's money, that's sort of the governmental money, can cover a certain percentage of the TMA budget to reflect residential ridership, as long as that happens, it doesn't matter where it comes from. And then you as voters can say, you can prioritize them to work to get other people's money. Like if we can get Alameda County to pitch in for a couple buses, we've made our contribution, you know, and if we don't, then it's general fund. I don't know what, but you have that power that's unique, you know, and maybe there's a way to incentivize that power into a revenue stream.
Well,
I'm not sure there's one answer to the revenue issue. I think I am trying to get some sense of perhaps a multi-strand approach. And, you know, in some of these questions, I think